Hello, everyone. Welcome to this amazingly informative conversation I believe that we're going to have with the people behind the extremely important series that's now airing on PBS about Asian Americans. I think you all know why you're here, and you probably are in the same position as we all are, which is that we've been longing for something like this for a very long time. And finally we have it, and it's wonderful to have with us today the two people who are very much behind the genesis of it. The first is Don Young. He's the director of the Center for Asian American Media, or CAM. CAM has been at the forefront of galvanizing our community in so many different ways, particularly in media. And Don was there from the very beginning. And we also have Stewart Kwoh, who is the founder of Asian Americans Advancing Justice, also an amazingly impactful organization that's been serving the community for decades. So welcome, Don, welcome, Stewart, and welcome all of you to this conversation. Asian Americans is a series that has, and I've watched the whole thing by now, all 5 hours, has been uncovering so many incredible stories about the history of Asian Americans. I defy anyone who's watched it to not learn something or the other. It's like you've uncovered this wealth. It's like an anthropological study of Asian Americans. Can you tell us, Don, how it all began? And I know it's been quite some time ago that it did all start. So please tell us more about that.
Sure. Thank you, Janet. First of all, thank you all for coming out today. The series, boy, we couldn't have expected when we first set out to do it in 2012, how much resonance, contemporary resonance it would have. So the project came about because Jeff Bieber, an executive producer at WETA in Washington, D.C., he had done a series of comprehensive ethnic PBS series, history series. And he had worked with Renee Tajima Pena once before and reached out to Kim and said, can you all partner with us? It had always been a dream of the documentary filmmaking community to put a series this comprehensive together. It was really important and valuable to have a partner who had really, particularly fundraised and mounted such a big production before. But as you'll hear, it really took a lot of really key important leaders in our community, both in front of and behind the camera, to put this really ambitious show together. We're really appreciative of how important the series has become. The audiences have been really large. The feedback has been positive. And I think most importantly, it's gratifying to hear that in this really difficult time, the series has been one way in which we as Asian Americans can stake our claim in a really difficult moment.
I think it will definitely last the test of time. But what was it like from the very beginning? Because it's rather an overwhelming subject. How did you approach what the stories that you wanted to tell were going to be?
So, initially the idea was to be as comprehensive as possible, but we knew the goal wasn't to create a series solely by and for Asian Americans, right? It was important that the authorship really feel like it came out of a community, but we really wanted to be a conversation about the American identity, if that makes sense, right? So it was really, we wanted it to be about human stories, family stories, emotional stories about America. The 5 episodes are organized around historic turning points, right? The creation of the Transcontinental Railroad, World War II, post-Civil War. So it was really, all the 5 episodes are sort of designed around historic linchpins.
That is definitely true, but unlike many documentaries which focus purely on the topic, with each topic in this, you found a personal story. So you were able to talk to the descendants of, or people who related, or people who were there. That must have been quite challenging. And I'm not sure in the meantime what stories you had to let go because you couldn't find those people, or how you overcame the challenges of actually gathering all these bodies together. It's quite a monumental achievement.
Yeah, thank you. There are this is part of why CAM exists, our filmmakers exist. There were certainly stories we wish we could have dug into further. One that comes of mind are Filipino Americans in World War II, right? The vets and how they fought for equity after. There are as many stories as there are in this series, there are other sort of unearthing of history that we wish we could have done more, but we really hope this series is a primer and a starting point for the history rather than definitive, right?
The executive producer, Renee Tajima Pena, had just emailed me about how she's hoping that this series will provide a panoply of stories that then can be further explored, perhaps in a narrative way or whatever. But it feels both very educational and good for the mind, but also incredibly heartfelt and emotional for the heart. So thank you again for this great achievement. Stewart, you also had a pivotal role in the creation of this series. Tell us how you got involved.
Well, Don Young and Jeff Bieber came to see me in 2014. So it's been a 6-year odyssey and journey. I first of all want to thank Janet and Don for participating. I want to thank the Committee of 100, Z and Fulton for setting this up. And as Janet told me earlier, we hope this is more of a series than a one-shot deal. They came to see me in 2014. They knew I was the executive director of Asian Americans Advancing Justice. I'm not sure if they knew that I had taught at UCLA for 35 years, Asian Americans and the Law. And I'm not sure if they know my mother, Beulah Kwoh, had been in the movie business since 1955 with Love is a Many Splendored Thing. So I had a history of wanting to see Asian Americans in film. I had wanted the history of Asian Americans to be told honestly and truthfully. So anyway, I jumped into helping them raise money. People like Sue Van with the Coulter Foundation was a tremendous ally and partner. John and Marilyn Long with their daughter Vivian were very supportive. The Kay family. I also approached Carnegie and Ford. The head of Ford told me, "Why has it taken you so long? Because your story should have been told long ago." Spring Wang, others joined in to help fund the film. In all, I think I raised about $2.5 million for the film out of the $5.5 million budget. So we were successful in raising the money. And then Don and Jeff discovered that my wife, Pat, and I had worked on a book called Untold Civil Rights Stories, Asian Americans Speak Out for Justice. So my wife, Pat, had worked on the curriculum. And so they said, not only should you raise money, but would you also be in charge of the 36 lesson plans that we want to come out after the film, and we'll put it on the PBS learning site, and you could put it on the Asian Americans Advancing Justice learning site. And so we said yes. So not only did we raise the money, but we have to be responsible for all the curriculum that we're still trying to raise resources. Sue Van has been tremendously helpful, and so have the Long and Kay families. But now we hope to show the film clips to millions of students and teachers throughout the United States of America. So we're hoping that the life of this film will be in the matter of years, not in the matter of 1 or 2 nights.
That is such an important advancement in education, really, because one of the reasons I think our community has felt sidelined is that people were not educated about who we were, about our history. And not only has the study of Asia in general been minimized, but certainly Asian Americans, we barely made a blip, in the consciousness of people. So that sounds incredibly important. And you mentioned your mother, Beulah. When I first came to Los Angeles in the mid-'80s, she's one of the first people I met. Back then in Hollywood, you could count literally on one hand how many actively working Asian actors there were. and your mother was one of them. But she was much more than that. She was really a community leader. She was able to speak out forcefully about issues related to our community. And I think it must have been very different for you growing up in an environment where there was already so much outspokenness about that. I think Don earlier mentioned in a conversation that he came from a family of immigrants, and for many of us, our parents did not want to speak about their painful past. So Stewart, can you describe a little bit what that was like? And then I'm going to ask the question to Don in the same way. Like, we all carry baggage. We all have our cultural and family history, and we have to overcome what some of those obstacles are. So Stewart, what was that like for you? It's almost unimaginable because we were barely visible in the industry, and your mother was working for decades before there was even a vocabulary to discuss what we were all going through. And, you know, it's too bad that she's not with us here today, because she would be very, very proud.
Well, thank you. I'm lucky because I had the viewpoint of a father who was an immigrant student from Shanghai, and a mother who was born in California, in Stockton. And so she had the sensitivity of a person born in the United States, fully Americanized, but also had a sensitivity to American culture. So my mom was a co-founder of the East-West Players. And I remember the first plays of the East-West Players took place in our church basement. And so I remember the days where the East-West Player founders would be arguing in our...
Oh, we've lost you, Stewart, momentarily.
Oh.
Oh no. Okay, Don, I'm gonna let you jump in while Stewart comes
Yeah,
back.
I'll fill the gap while...
Oh, good. Stewart's back. Stewart's back. We lost you for a few seconds there, Stewart.
I'm back.
Please continue.
Yeah, so I'm just lucky to have that cultural sensitivity of both a parent who was born in California and a father who was a foreign student from Shanghai. So they really taught me a lot about appreciating both cultures, and I've done that ever since.
And were they very influential in your deciding to found the Center for Asian Americans Media? I'm sorry, for Asian Americans Advancing Justice?
Well, yes, they were always supportive of my role. I was supposed to be a doctor, but because of the anti-war activity, I became a lawyer instead. And they still supported me, even though my first paycheck was $500.
So, Don, what about you? What was your personal background like, and how did you come into CAM?
Sure. My family had pretty unique. So both sides of the family came from southern China in the 1860s, and both of the great grandfathers did well enough to go back. Right back in those years, the hope was not to stay, but to do well enough so you could prosper in China. And then after things went historically bad in China, they came back here. But you know, my family's been here almost, you know, by and large since the 1860s. In their immigration files, I have a photo of my grandfather born in the Central Valley with a Q, right? Like that rare, he had a cowboy hat and a Q going back to China when he was like 8 years old. You know, when I first started, I came of age in the 80s when folks like Stewart were really fighting for justice for Vincent Chin. And then parallel also, when the movement for reparations was happening for the Japanese American community after internment. So it was I certainly didn't go through what I think really is for Asian Americans, the great generation in regards to building up ethnic studies, the Asian American identity, you know, a real assertive voice. You know, that really happened in the 60s. I was sort of that first generation who was really influenced by those pioneers. So I think that was really formative, but it was, you know, none of this was taught in schools. When I first told my grandfather I wanted to learn more about Angel Island and getting first exposed to Asian American studies, he was resentful. He was really almost feeling as if, why would I want to like uncover what was such painful, difficult history, right? I think that's a repeated, it was so, I was proud of what he had gone through and really wanted to make sure that the legacy was properly given, right? To his sacrifice, right? And, it's unfortunate he only lived a few years after that, but that pain that all of our ancestors had to go through carried on to generations, right? So I think it is, for the series, it's a privilege to be able to unearth that and to be able to help, really rewrite history in the way it always should have been written, right?
And do you think those personal struggles of your family help fuel your desire to work on things like this and work at CAM?
Absolutely. Yeah, it was absolutely formative. And, I think I was fortunate enough to come up at a time where just when I was starting, a lot of the filmmakers who are around us, at least in documentary, the Arthur Dongs, the Renee Tajima-Peñas, the Frida Lee Mox, they were really just starting to find their way as really top tier filmmakers, right? So that was really important to me. Yeah.
What I find interesting is that a lot of people were behind the making of this. You had a lot of different producers, and you have wonderful voiceover narration from Daniel Day Kim and Tamlin. You have wonderful speakers. There are a lot of people, and there's probably many, many more that you could have included. That's a big change from what things were like in the past. How did you go about putting together a team, the right team, to make this?
Mm-hmm. So the first person, initially that we brought on was Renee, and her job was to really help conceptualize the overall vision of the series. And then after that, we brought on the three producers, Leo Chang, Gita Gandabir, Grace Lee, all really celebrated documentarians. And we knew that it was as important that we do right by our creative and academic community, right? That, as you say, Janet, that there had been decades of folks who had been giving, hoping a project like this could succeed. We certainly wouldn't have been able to pull this off without Stewart's support and that the fundraising, but also the credibility of somebody who was such a respected leader in our community. And behind the camera, it's just, from the Ming Na narrates, Tamlin Tamita. There were so many folks who, the last couple of years, understood the breadth of the series and its importance even before COVID-19 happened, right? They really felt, that our time had come and that our history needed to be shared with the larger public. But, I think as often happens in community, people really it was important for them to give as best they could, right? So for example, some of the footage with Connie Young Yu and Angel Island, Frida Lee Mock filmed that in the 1970s, right? So she was generous in terms of sharing that material with us. And she said it was really striking to hear that when that film first came out, few folks understood this idea of how difficult it was for Chinese Americans and their experience here. But it's now it's almost as if there's more interest in that film 45 years later, because audiences have caught up with its importance, right? And I think this is what it takes for community to back each other, to tell our stories, and to play the long game in terms of equally sharing responsibility.
For sure, if there's anything that one realizes watching, is that the consciousness really has changed. And the consciousness, not just for the Asian American community, but for the community at large, for the entire nation, because how we were seen by others and now how people are watching this. I feel in many ways it could not have come out at a better time, because we are at such an inflection point. And once again, our identities are being questioned. We were as we discussed earlier, we were kind of on a roll for a while there. When Crazy Rich Asians came out, we had this amazing blockbuster film that everybody celebrated. And then we had The Farewell, and we had an Academy Award winning film that was in the Korean language. It felt like in many ways, there were markings that we had sort of arrived, at least on the entertainment stage. Mm-hmm. But now a lot has changed just in the last few months. How do you think that because we are where we are now, that's actually created more interest in the film than otherwise might have been there? Or or not?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. So there's no question, I think we always felt that there would be an audience who would embrace the storytelling and the history, but it's become urgent, right? And I think the history that's told, it's not to exaggerate. We understand in full terms that, we hear about how many, stop AAPI hate crimes, like there's been over 1,600 hate crimes reported, right? So people's lives are at risk. And I think it's important that a new narrative be told whereby we have been fundamentally important to creating this country. And hopefully it will shift perception and, honestly save, hopefully there won't be as much violence directed towards our community. It's that serious right now, right?
It is very haunting to go back and see footage of the Vincent Chin case and other examples, historic examples of where we were really targeted in a violent way. And I don't think many of us expected that that would become the case again. We like to think that we're moving forward and there's real progress. So that's become, it's become something on many of our minds. And I guess we just have to do whatever we can to keep changing perceptions. What was it like for you, Stewart, when you went out to potential contributors, financial contributors to the series? What was the reaction that you received? Was it difficult to find those generous folks?
Well, I think there were people like Sue Van of the Coulter Foundation who basically joined me in saying this is the last opportunity in our lives that we're going to have a film on Asian Americans. So there was a tremendous sensitivity about the opportunity. And so that was wonderful. There were some funders who wanted to fund this, but they were worried about the fact that PBS mainly has an older white audience. And so they were a little bit nervous that their funding would go for nothing against an older white audience, but they wanted the diversity of America, especially younger people, to really appreciate the challenges and the accomplishments of Asian Americans. And so they ended up funding the curriculum because, as well as the film, but they really wanted the curriculum to get out to the broad array of Americans. And so I think that was the challenge. I think later on, some people said, okay, how does this, to your point, how does this play into fighting against the racist attacks? How does it play into fighting the common enemy? And I think the film does that by showcasing how Asian Americans have faced challenges and still have accomplished a great deal, still struggle to this day. And so that was, I still remember Mrs. Chin, Vincent's mom, and I remember I was the moderator at a Chinatown gathering in Los Angeles, and she fainted. And I helped her to her feet. And later on that night, I said, Lily, are you okay? And she said, Stewart, I'm okay, but there's nothing I can do to bring back Vincent. And I don't want any other mother to go through what I've gone through. And that always stuck with me, that we who are still around need to do everything we can do to make sure that no other mother goes through what Lily Chin went through. And so that drives me even to this day. And I think that we have to, when I was fundraising for the film, I had Lily with me. I had obviously my wife with me. I had my mother and father with me. So it was something that we had to do. We had to do because we had to showcase what Asian Americans have gone through, and still we persist. We still persevere. And to me, that's the exciting part of this film, that we still persevere.
And because if we don't remind ourselves of history, it just repeats itself, right? I think that is what
Absolutely.
I get out of the series, is that, yes, we move forward, a couple of steps forward, and then maybe a few steps back and forward and back. And there's no giving up the good fight. We have to keep going. We mustn't relent. And so now we have something that again can be seen again and again, which of course is what's wonderful about the medium that we work in, is that this will not go away. Now there's something that should be seen really by every school child in the world, but particularly in America. This is a vital part of American history, and people do need to be reminded. I'm still very moved by some of the stories that I saw, and and it's a good thing that you caught their descendants just in time, because some of them were also very old too, right? To hear the stories coming straight from someone's mouth and not just have it be a third person thing, it makes all the difference in the world, I think.
And the nice thing is that my wife is, while she's working on the 36 lesson plans, she's going to have short clips, 5-minute to 15-minute clips. So students in their regular classes can actually get this whole, the 36 lessons, but they could get any number of lessons in a manageable classroom setting. So it'll be, they don't have to sit there for 5 hours to get the full import of this series. They'll be able to get one class all the way to 36 classes, but they will be able to see short clips of the film. So again, I think the potential, if we can get all the resources together, will be vast to reach millions of students. So that to me is very exciting, because we know there's only so many people who could sit through 5 hours of a film. But when you see getting short clips in the classroom, we can do it, and we can reach millions of students.
That's phenomenal. Really, because there's been such a dearth of this, I'm going to go out on a limb and say, I bet this ends up becoming one of the most popular PBS series ever. There's
yeah, I mean,
like it.
Yeah, we've gotten initial ratings, and Janet, you being in entertainment, so the numbers were quite high, I think. And obviously people are in lockdown now, so they're home. But the first night we averaged a little over a 1.1 rating, right? So it's about, in terms of true viewers, probably 3.5 million viewers per episode, right? So that, I'm sure the numbers are up probably 30% because people are at home, but those are really significant numbers of audience. And I think the demographics are probably 2/3 Caucasian and probably a third, communities of color. But those are really significant numbers. And from social media to press to, folks contacting us, it's clear that this series came at the right time for a lot of people. Right? So.
It came at the right time, and it really services a big gap that existed. I have spoken not infrequently to universities or other organizations, and there is such a hunger. It's not that long ago that Chinese language was started being taught in schools, but there's really such a hunger for firsthand material that relates to the history of Asians. We have much to share, but there was never a really good coagulated way to do that. It was all in kind of fits and starts. So I even wonder, again, just putting myself out there, whether there could be more in this series. I feel that there's much more to be told about even recent history of Asian Americans, and that, you do a really wonderful deep dive into certain historic aspects, but maybe as we evolve, maybe this can be something else that continues to be documented. Something
That's
to
the
think
hope.
about.
Yeah, folks have raised that. We were just trying to finish the series, but it's clear so many people see this as a starting point rather than, I think for a lot of our filmmakers, it's a culmination of decades of work. But I think for the Asian American community, it's really the starting point. Right? So.
And
we have been contacted, and we've been contacting various teacher organizations, and they are really, really excited about the series and being able to bring the lesson plans into the classroom. So the National Education Association, the NEA, the AFT, the California Teachers Association, SEIU has already joined us in opposing anti-Asian racism, and they have pledged to help us spread the film to all sorts of classrooms. So from school districts to networks, we're being asked by teachers all around the country to help start the training and to showcase the film in the classroom. So we're very hopeful that we'll be able to get this into hopefully millions of students' hands and eyes this in the next few years.
It sounds very promising. And also speaking to the fear that you encountered by others that young people wouldn't watch it because PBS is geared to an older white audience. Young people go anywhere, anytime for whatever they want. They are so agnostic. It doesn't matter. They don't care. They really don't care. Everything's available to them at the same time. So I hope this is further proof of that, because millennials for sure just, they just call up whatever they want. It's more about the content than it is the delivery system.
Yes.
I think that it's time to actually turn to all of you, the audience, for questions. There are a few on the chat, but we already received quite a few over the weekend. So I'm going to start with those because they were the early birds and they catch the worm. To descendants of railroad workers and war heroes, have you observed or experienced any improvement in the way Asian Americans in the US are treated through the trajectory of your lives? We may not all be descendants of railroad workers or war heroes, but we've all had some trajectory. Perhaps one of you wants to address that.
Well, I think that we've made a lot of progress, but I think the reality of Asian American history is that we go in cycles. We have a lot of ups and downs rather than a trajectory of being oppressed all the time. I think that we've made tremendous strides, but we face these down periods. So for example, the Chinese were like the political dirt of California for several decades. And so as we were coming out of that, then the incarceration of Japanese Americans happened. So it's not as though you could expect just a straight trajectory of prosperity. And now we see with the COVID virus, COVID-19, that there's another trajectory downward because of the close to 2,000 attacks and the just the vilification of China. And so we have to fight back. I think, to me, the most important advance that we've made over these decades is we know better how to fight back. Our ancestors had to go to the courts. They couldn't rally hundreds and thousands and millions of people. But now we have the ability to build coalitions. We have the ability to, as I said, SEIU has, in a pledge statement, joined us to oppose anti-Asian violence. That would not have happened when our ancestors were building the railroads because the unions were against us. Now we have the second largest union in the United States pledging their support to oppose anti-Asian racism. I think that's a big gain.
Yeah. Yeah, because even, Stewart, right, even during Justice for Vincent Chin, the unions were conflicted in terms of positions to take in relation to the Asian American community. Isn't that right? As recent as the 80s, right?
Yes, they were bashing in the Japanese cars with sledgehammers during that 1982 period.
I would add to that, we have a lot more tools now. We have social media. We have platforms like the one that we're on, Zoom, which was created by an Asian American. We have the confidence, really. We have communities that back us. We have journalists, and even in traditional media, who are speaking out. In my own lifetime, I've seen huge changes. So it seems like often there's a circumstantial situation which causes us, for instance, supposedly the stealing of jobs or the Japanese coming, the Chinese coming in, this or that. But we are better armed now to fight back. and we know, and it's no longer uncomfortable. I think for a long time, it's interesting. Somebody did ask about this, and I don't mind bringing it up. Not so much as a criticism, but as a point of discussion. Andrew Yang, when he made those statements about Asian Americans, just proving that we're more patriotic, wearing red, white, and blue. I'm sure there are some people who feel that way, and that's a legitimate point of view. But I think many of us feel, no, it is not the way to go, that we do need to speak up. And we have the platforms, and people are listening. I noticed that huge change when we rebelled against the jokes made against Asians at the Oscars. You know, it was not okay. So I think if we keep reminding people that it's just not okay, and Cam has certainly done an amazing job, as you have, Stewart. And now I think we are very prone to wanting to organize. There's so many different community organizations now, Committee of 100 being one, and Asia Society, and Gold House, and What and Cape, and CAM, and Visual Communications. So all we have to do is link together laterally, and we are really formidable. And the point that you made earlier, Don, about the census, and how if we combine all the minorities, we are a majority, and that situation is not far around the corner. So the times really have changed, and that is gratifying to see. Not to say that we can rest on our laurels, however.
That's right.
Okay, just a few more. Was there anything that was edited out of the series that there wasn't a time enough for, or you just didn't make the final cut that perhaps was particularly painful for you, Don?
Let's see, I forget how much footage we shot. We probably shot, for a 5-hour series, I think we had over 150 hours of material. So I don't want to pinpoint one historical story, because there was way more. There wasn't nearly enough room for all the history. We initially envisioned the series as 8 hours, right? So we even in comparison to what the 5 hours, losing that much time was pretty tough. Yeah. So any history people can think of, it's painful not to. We should have, some key icons like Fred Korematsu. We wish he deserves a whole episode on him, right? There are a lot of civil rights leaders and early pioneers, but there's a certain discipline we had to keep to that makes it painful.
And this is a good question. Will there be subtitled versions in various Asian languages? Somebody says they want to share it with their parents and relatives, and obviously it would help if there were different subtitles.
Yeah, PBS they're going to be distributing the series internationally. So we are trying to put subtitles in place, at least a number of Asian languages. So that's the goal.
So what do you feel, this is to both of you, how would you advise younger Asian American generations to overcome the bamboo ceiling and lack of representation in both news media and Hollywood and cultural arts?
Well, I think that it's a matter of keeping up the challenge, making sure that our voices are heard. We have to speak out when things are not happening the way we think and they ought to be happening. We need to speak out, because if we're silent, then we really suffer. We really have to speak out for our rights, for other people's rights. We have to build coalitions. We have to vote. We have to participate in the census. We have to build power. I think I've looked at the African American and the Latino communities. The most important activists always spoke out. They didn't suffer in silence. They spoke out. They kept on organizing. They kept on getting people to vote. They created power bases. I remember the Latino Media Coalition. One year, you could have pretty good representation on the media. 1 year. And then the next year, you're gone. You're invisible. So if you don't speak out, you'll become invisible once again. So there's no luxury to say, oh, we've made it. Now we don't have to speak out. No, you always have to be present. You have to speak out. You have to be the thorn in people's sides. I remember my mother, this is in the 70s and 80s. She was speaking on behalf of the Asian American actors. She had a big dinner with all the studio executives, and she basically argued that we need to be present, we need to be visible. And that was, even though she was the busiest actress in that time period, she risked it because she had to speak the truth. She had to say, we have to be visible and you all need to pay attention.
Don, do you have anything to add to that?
I mean, I think this year was good. We were on the cusp of, well, we've already seen in the last few weeks so much great culture making and storytelling, right? So I think I'm curious with this COVID moment, how it's going to affect our storytelling, what comes after this moment. But I think we were clearly headed towards, 2020 on so many levels was going to be a sort of coming of age, right? We had a presidential candidate, the census, the elections. But if you look at our storytellers, particularly in film and TV, in just the last few weeks, there's been such an unleashing of talent and stories, right? So I think in that, I'm quite optimistic. It was striking to us when Crazy Rich Asians happened a few years ago. Like, we were obviously happy for it, but I think that conversation between popular culture and social issues and politics, who would have thought, we, at least in terms of the series, we know we were really beneficiaries of a film like Crazy Rich Asians, really priming in a mainstream audience. It's a commercial film, but it's political in the sense that it's about representation and telling your story, right? So I think that really, who would have expected that a film based on a popular bestseller would also help to politicize mainstream audience? It really is a stepping stone. We don't wish to be in this particular moment, but we do have to embrace what's gotten us here. And I'm, in some ways, like, this is all gone in an unexpected manner, but those popular films really stake a claim culturally in a mass audience level, right?
Well,
I think the coronavirus has changed our lives, not only as Americans, but as Asian Americans. And I think we need the media to cover our fight against the racist attacks. I do believe in that. We're doing that. We're tracking. We're trying to get help for people. We're building coalitions. But I also think there's a story to be told about how Asian Americans are on the front lines as grocery workers, as nurses. Half of the nurses in Los Angeles are Filipino nurses. When do you see their stories being told? Yeah. Asian American doctors, groups like the Committee of 100 raising over $1 million to fund PPEs, personal protective equipment, for hospitals, including Black and Latino hospitals. When do you see that on the news? I think that we have a lot of work to do to uplift what we're doing, not to brag, not to be a different American, but we're joining all Americans in the fight against the common enemy. Andrew Yang said something that was kind of controversial. I don't think we have to prove ourselves. We're already on the front lines. We just want that uplifted so all Americans can see what we're doing. And I just think that it's a new day that we're challenged with. And I think with our current president, he's going after China left and right. It doesn't matter what China does, he's going after China. So this is going to last for years to come. Hopefully there's a change, but we know that this is going to last for a while to come, and we have to be prepared. We cannot delude ourselves that this will somehow disappear. I don't believe that. We have to work at it. We have to build political power, and this is the time to do it.
Yeah, that's right. And in regard to our series, what's clear, and history, well, maybe more so about history, whether it's Vietnam War era, when the world is in turmoil, that's often when communities strengthen, right? So Vincent Chin case, right, Stewart, that's a case in point where it was such a low, spiritual low for our community, but so much came out of such, a difficult moment, right? And hopefully we can all find a way together to build something of everlasting importance now. I mean, I think it's going to be, the challenge is on all of us, but I have a feeling there will be some really great things that come out of this moment, and hopefully we can all discover that together sooner rather than later.
Both of you said so many things that stimulated me. I'm thinking about the relationship between culture and economics and politics. So when you talk about Crazy Rich Asians, that became a big opening in the same way Black Panther did for African Americans and Wonder Woman did for women, because you sometimes need just something so big and loud and economically successful that people wake up. That will often be the thing that causes change, So we had that, but then following that, we had many, many other things that were much less obvious in terms of their commerciality. At this moment in time, speaking from Hollywood, almost every Asian American writer, director, actor I know, and there are many, they're all working. We're all working. We're there. And fortunately, what goes on in Hollywood, it's often completely at odds at what's going on in Washington. Yes, the relationship in the US and China is at the testiest it's ever been in decades. But what that is saying about us is not necessarily represented on screen. And actually, I feel like in some ways, and I tend to be optimistic, it will actually help us. It will help us because people will want to counteract what looks like very, very unreasonable biases against Asians. And I do think that on that front, we have a lot to look forward to. The other things that have really helped, of course, is that the China market is so large. So people have to think, if you're a corporation, you have to think about what do people Chinese like to watch or eat or buy or whatever. So that market is so important to so many business people. And also, again, social media and streaming. So the streamers, they don't care where the eyeballs are from. So they also need to be particularly sensitive to all cultures, wherever there's a pair of eyeballs. And all this works in our favor, I think. It's just and also sometimes having a common enemy is very, very helpful. And I feel like we have that now. We have the enemy, all these things Stewart mentioned, Committee 100 has something called Faces of the Cure, which is celebrating Asians on the front lines. But there's the hashtag wash the hate, hashtag racism is a virus, hashtag hate is a virus, hashtag all Americans, hashtag get us PPP. We are at the forefront, and the only way to battle negative images is through positive ones. And I think that's happening in a big way right now. I'm going to just quickly check the chat to see if there's a question here. I have more on my everyone seems to just be praising the series. Okay, when this Asian American history course becomes available, where can we find out more info about it? Is there any potential that this curriculum and clips get developed as an online course? Very good question, to reach a wider audience and easier to refer to others. Stewart, what do you think about that?
Well, my wife, Pat, is getting this whole curriculum on the PBS learning site. So it'll be on the PBS learning site. It will also be on the website of Asian Americans Advancing Justice. So it'll be available in both places, and it can be used for online courses as well. We're actually trying to develop it not only for high school, middle school, and elementary school. There's 4 lessons for elementary school, but we're also trying to develop lesson plans for community colleges. So it can be used for online courses as well. So we, if people are interested in working with us, they could just email us and we'll try to respond.
Great, that's great to know. Here's another question online. curious, when doing the interviews, did you feel it was your place to correct the interviewees' use of American to only refer to white Americans? It's frustrating to me because it shows how ingrained the perpetual foreigner ideas that even as Asian Americans use language that suggests we don't belong. I think that's something that we've all probably run into a fair amount. Don, do you want to address that?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with the comment. It's hard to correct people in interview and keep the flow going, but it is, I think it's interesting. A lot of the feedback we've been getting is very precisely about terminologies. And, you know, one of the other areas that one's been brought up actually probably 4 or 5 times. Also, the question of concentration camps versus relocation centers versus internment camps, right? So that these are all part of, you know, how to terminologies for history that are sensitive to different communities, right? So it's very hard to get everybody in the series to speak the exact same language, right? In terms of historic reference, I think that's an astute observation, though. So.
It is, and it is uncomfortable. And sometimes I have to watch myself too, because, you know, we all have biases. We all have inherent biases, and we do, you know, we're really, the goal, I think, is just to raise consciousness and awareness.
That's right. Yeah.
And, you know, we're never in a perfect place, but we just need to keep
it's a fair critique and concern.
Here's a question. What are some topics that you chose to exclude in the final cut of the production? Is there a reason why you didn't explore the Virginia Tech mass shooting, Army hazing, MC Jin, Jeremy Lin, Yo-Yo Ma?
All the above. I mean, I think those are some of obviously a number of those are also more recent developments, right? So I think we wanted to, because it was a history series, we weren't sure, you know, even as recent as like two weeks before air, PBS was asking if we should, in fact, add a segment on COVID, right? But we just weren't sure that we would have quite the enough historical perspective to do justice to those threads, right? So I think all of those are, you know, we didn't get into, for example, like Wen Ho Lee, which would have been really resonant, right? So there are a lot more stories to tell. And
perhaps now that you've established the first, there'll be even more support to do future series
hopefully.
Like this, you know, and again, there are so many different organizations. I think back to the time over 25 years ago when we did Joy Luck Club. I mean, there was not even a discussion of an Asian community or a voice or anything. There was nowhere to turn to. It just simply did not exist. And so it didn't catch on. But now I feel like anything that's coming out, whether it be Alan Yang's Tiger Tail or Alice Wu's, you know, everything that comes out, there's a way for it to stick and for the message to be extended well beyond, you know, just a narrow circle. And that's I think what movements are all about. And so this is, you know, a very, very different time.
As one example, Janet, we hope that somebody will pick up the Pacific Islanders, because when we did this series, we decided we have to focus on Asian Americans because they're so diverse. There's so many groups. And if we did a Pacific Islander series, it would just be a whole different historical challenge. So that story remains to be told around Pacific Islanders. And as people know, Pacific Islanders have been amongst the worst hit on the COVID virus and are dying very disproportionately to their population numbers. So I hope somebody will pick up that story because it's so important to tell.
And perhaps you're going to be getting a lot of feedback on what people are really hungry to see more of, you know, and this becomes an interesting database for PBS and all of us to see, okay, this is what's on people's minds. You know, there's a lot of curiosity. You've already made a big contribution to filling what was a vacuum of information. And, you know, I think that's only stimulating the desire to see more and more and more. So carry on. All right.
By the way, in California, even in California, there's only one Asian American story that is in the standards, and that is the story of Fred Korematsu, and that was fought for by his daughter, Karen. And nothing else, the railroad workers, nothing else is covered in the standards. So people are hungry throughout the United States for these lesson plans, and we hope that people will help us distribute it because we really need that help.
Well, and I do, thank the African American community in large part for at least getting people to think about in a not purely white way. And I think they helped open the doors, so we are a step behind the African American community perhaps, but are able to take advantage of the fact that no one believes anymore that stories should be told just through white men, right?
That's
So we have that advantage, and I feel that it's important at the same time that we lift up others.
Mm-hmm.
And it is very gratifying to hear from people who have seen Asian works over the years saying, "Oh, this changed my life," even though they themselves are not Asian. So we're doing perhaps this. I like to think we're serving a whole community of people that beyond our own. It's any.
If I can add a word on coalition building, I think you're absolutely right, Janet, that when we do coalition building, of course, we want people to come out like SEIU against the anti-Asian attacks, but Asian Americans also need to reach out to Blacks and Latinos and Pacific Islanders who are disproportionately dying from the coronavirus. And we need to reach out to support them, help their hospitals, help their organizations make the demands around fair and equitable health practices. Otherwise, we're just asking people to help us, but we're not reaching out to help them. And so in a coalition, you've got to do both. Otherwise, it's just one-sided and it won't work.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And we're strength in numbers. Strength in numbers. We have more in common than we have differences. We've suffered from the same mentality that has inflicted a lot of pain on people of color. I know in the film industry, we are definitely, I am trying to work with Latinx people. And, John Chu just recently directed a movie that Lin-Manuel Miranda wrote based on
Heights, yeah.
And everyone's looking forward to that. And there's been the movie forgive me about the African American lawyer who's defending people on death row. That was made by an Asian filmmaker, and Destin Daniel Cretton.
Yeah,
also doing
Just Mercy. That's right.
So, Just Mercy. Thank you. So there's so much. It's a sensibility, I believe, that we all share, and that's what's most important.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm just going to ask maybe one or two more questions. I think we have to wind this up soon. What are some of the things? Did I ask this already, to gain more equity and parity? I did ask that already. So the related question was about, more parity in politically and culturally and in the corporate world as well. What would you like to see happen? What do you have certain goals that you'd like to see achieved?
Well, I'll just start out by saying, I hope everybody votes. We need to build that power base, because if we don't vote, people recognize that and then they don't pay attention to us. And then if we do vote, but if we're all divided up, then people don't pay attention to us either, because they don't think we're a solid vote. So I think there has to be a lot of discussion around who the best candidates are, and vote as a block as much as possible. And I would say in the corporate world, we need to make sure that people really understand our issues. I went to see Adam Schiff a few months ago before the impeachment started, and he's a very sensitive congressman. He didn't even know about the discrimination against Chinese scientists. He had not heard about it. And this just a few months ago. We need to not take anything for granted. So in a couple of weeks, I'm going to speak to the Microsoft employees, as a whole group, we need to get ourselves in front of the corporate world as much as possible, because do not assume that they've heard about the anti-Asian attacks. Do not assume that they understand the anxiety and the fear that Asian Americans are confronting. They don't have a relative who's been confronted and called names or being spit at, or worse yet, being stabbed. So don't assume that the corporate world understands what is happening to us in this period of time. We need to reach out to them and make sure we get in front of them now.
I couldn't agree more. And it's really important that people in the cultural field and the political field and in the business world, we work together. I'm often the person championing culture because that's the area that I work in. But you know, what we do is really help change perceptions of people. But then we need politicians to stand up and talk about these issues in a very, very persuasive way. And we need the corporate world also, because they are masterminding a lot of the things going on in our economy. All of this it's so interconnected, and I believe we really need to respect all sectors of our society, and work as scientists and whatnot, you know. So that is I think we all share the same goal. And I so appreciate what you, Don, and you, Stewart, have done in bringing this series to life. It will stand the test of time. And if you all enjoyed this conversation, perhaps we will arrange for further, because there were so many amazing people involved in the making of this series. And they also have interesting perspectives. I know a lot of people, even those who were narrating, they said they learned so much. And it would be interesting to hear how working on this series, it affected them, you know, how it also changed their perspective. It would be great to hear more feedback, maybe from the people who are writing you, Don, about what they'd like to see more of in the series. It might be a really nice interactive kind of conversation to have. Sure. And it might create a convincing argument for why there should be more. So perhaps with that, let me just check the chat so much. I think most people are thanking you for this conversation. And again, bravo, bravo, bravo. So we will hopefully see you again. Stay tuned to the C100, Committee of 100 website to see if we will have future conversations. I believe we will, and I hope to be a part of them. Thank you, Don. Thank you, Stewart. And thank all of you for creating this wonderful series, and all of you for watching.
Thank you, Janet.
Thank you very much.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.